Right now, Tokayev stabbed Putin in the back. A Kazakh turn that shattered the Kremlin's plans. Kazakhs are handing over Russian weapons to Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces are rejoicing, and the world is stunned. Astana has finally broken free from Moscow's orbit. Flames in the enemy's rear. Ukraine is striking with its new weapons. A technological revolution. Our people did it. Unique Ukrainian missiles and drones are turning Russian bases and power plants into ashes. The Kremlin is within striking range. Shock! China is leaving Putin on the sidelines. Xi Jinping has made a new bet. Beijing and Washington have joined forces. This is a knockout for Russia. Sensation! Putin is destroying his own army. The Russians have gone to certain death. What happened in Pokrovsk, the recent breakthrough into the city, was completely crushed by Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian armed forces are swiftly grinding down the motorized infantry. These shots must be seen. Mega reinforcements for the Ukrainian armed forces. Poland bursts in with backup. Armored vehicles straight from the factories. Artillery is being loaded on the move. Will Poland pull the final lever that will crush Moscow? All this and more in our program, Hotspot. Shock! Putin is humiliated. Tokayev delivers a blow to the back. A sensational decision. Russian weapons from Kazakhstan are flowing into Ukraine. Astana has done what the Kremlin didn't even dare to imagine. The Ukrainian armed forces are rejoicing. How did Kazakhstan finally break free from Moscow's influence? Watch further for all the details of this global shift. Kazakhstan, once friendly to Putin, is supplying weapons to Ukraine.
The former head of Romania's National Guard for Environmental Protection, Octavian Birceanu, claims he was offered 10 million euros for a deal to import ammunition from Kazakhstan. The Russian-made ammunition was allegedly to be repainted and sold to Europe for further delivery to Ukraine.
Kazakhstan is distancing itself from the war in Ukraine. Moreover, at one point, Ukrainian President Zelensky stated that he had offered the Russian dictator a meeting in Astana. To this, the president of Kazakhstan responded that his country is not a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. However, if there is a political necessity or requirement, Kazakhstan will accordingly provide its own territory, land or area for a meeting or gathering at the level of the heads or leaders of the two respective states. This offer is made in accordance with established diplomatic practices and protocols.
According to Birchan, he reported the offer to the law enforcement authorities and the National Anti-Corruption Directorate. At the same time, there was allegedly talk of another matter, the opening of a weapons or ammunition factory on Romanian territory.
At this point, it should be noted that Kazakhstan has chosen a strategy of maneuvering between the interests of its key political partners. These are first and foremost the United States, Russia and China. It should be noted that despite Kazakhstan being a CSTO country and moreover, the Tokayev regime actually came to power on, well, essentially with Russian support. At present, Kazakhstan is pursuing a policy that is almost independent from the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, following the results of the Central Asia-US Summit, Kazakhstan signed deals worth $17 billion.
We're talking about rare earth metals, primarily tungsten. In addition, agreements were signed on cooperation in the field of IT technologies, as well as a possible memorandum on the sale of 30 Boeing aircraft.
The president of Kazakhstan believes that the current US leadership has a greater understanding of the importance of Central Asia and praised Trump for his more responsive approach toward Russia. At the same time, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev calls a ceasefire in Ukraine possible and even praised Putin for his flexibility.
Kazakhstan was actually the first country within the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, that notably increased oil production, despite corresponding opposition from the Russian side. This triggered further chain reactions, namely the decision by OPEC countries themselves to increase oil production, which in turn led to a drop in prices and colossal economic losses for the Russian Federation.
Kazakhstan is trying to maintain relations with both Russia and the United States, taking a tactic of remaining silent about the war, but at the same time not supporting our country to the same extent as other European partners who consistently send aid packages to Ukraine. Urgent, Russia is burning. Ukraine is striking with its weapons. Sensational, our latest missiles and drones are burning the enemy's military and energy facilities. Shock in the Kremlin, which effective systems are turning the enemy's rear into ashes. Watch for all the details of this technological breakthrough.
Self-propelled artillery, mortars, drones, electronic warfare, shells, ammunition, communication systems, air defense, missiles. Ukraine is actively ramping up the production of its own military equipment and ammunition. Production is becoming increasingly precise, large-scale, and technologically advanced.
During this war, Ukraine has already reached the point where almost 60% of the weapons we have, the weapons our soldiers use, are Ukrainian-made, and these are powerful weapons with many advanced features.
This is no longer just a local industry. Ukraine is building its own military technological shield, a network of production lines, testing grounds, and combat units that turn ideas into weaponry, with our specialists immediately testing them in real-world conditions.
The Ukrainian side is scaling up precisely those strike systems with a range of over 1,000 kilometers.
Let's start with drones, the small but decisive technology that overnight changed the rules of war. The FP family of strike platforms and other Ukrainian models are produced according to the principle fast, cheap, effective. Their advantages are simplicity of design, speed of production, and tactical relevance. They make it possible to carry out precision strikes, disrupt enemy logistics, and keep hostile positions under pressure far from the front line.
In 2024, about 1 million units were contracted, and by 2025 production had increased to 30,000 FPV drones per month. It should be noted that this quantity, that is, the annual production of FPV drones, about 4 million, is a record figure, even taking into account the capabilities of the military-industrial complexes of all NATO countries combined. In other words, at this current moment, the Ukrainian defense industry is currently producing an unprecedented number of unmanned aerial vehicles. For comparison, the United States Army adds approximately up to 100,000 unmanned aerial vehicles to its arsenal each year. The Ukrainian defense industry, I emphasize again, produces up to 4 million drones.
The technological production formula is simple: composite fuselages, 3D printed wings, inexpensive components, and open-source navigation solutions. All this makes it possible to produce functional platforms in batches. But you can't cut costs on electronics. Navigation and guidance systems make the drones resistant to Russian electronic warfare. Otherwise, mass waves of launches won't break through the enemy's dense defenses. At the same time as drones, a strategic direction is also developing. Here, the key players are missiles and missile systems that strike the enemy's rear, depriving them of fuel, depots, and command nodes. Neptune is a domestically produced coastal anti-ship missile system that has strengthened the security of maritime borders and given Kiev tools to impact the enemy's logistics in the Black Sea.
Here, the truly unprecedented case in the entirety of world history is that Ukraine, as a country that essentially does not possess or maintain a navy, has managed to inflict severe and significant damage on the Russian Federation by destroying up to approximately 35% of the Black Sea Fleet's vessels. According to the British side, the naval activity of the Russian Federation in the Black Sea Basin has dropped to a historic low as a result of the use of strike drones and, accordingly, maritime drones.
Another important milestone is the FPV-5 Flamingo cruise missile. This is a fully Ukrainian development with a declared range of up to 3,000 kilometers.
For comparison, the legendary American Tomahawk has a strike range of 1,600 kilometers. The Tomahawk's warhead is about 500 kilograms, while the Flamingo's warhead is about 1,150 kilograms. The most recent documented use of the Flamingo, which is a weapon system, occurred when it was employed in a strike that targeted the oil terminal situated in the city of Tuapse. This incident marked a significant event in the operational history of the Flamingo. Moreover, Russian public channels themselves confirmed that the Ukrainian side used these means of attack.
By combining small drones and large cruise missiles, Ukraine gains both mass and strategy. Drones keep the enemy on edge, missiles strike critical targets, and together this seriously undermines the enemy's ability to wage a prolonged war. But the Ukrainian defense industry is not just about small and large systems, but also time-tested developments like Bodana, Stugna, and other artillery and anti-tank systems, which provide mobility, fire resilience, and operate within a unified strike network. Drone reconnaissance, artillery adjustment, precision missile strike. And then the cycle repeats.
40% of the Russian budget depends on revenue from the sale of oil and petroleum products. And accordingly, taking into account this important and budget-forming sector of the occupier country, adjustments are made to the actions of the Ukrainian side, specifically the careful and strategic use of strike drones and various means of destruction, namely the Flamingo and Neptune systems, at the moment of neutralizing the oil refining complex of the Russian Federation. According to the Russian side's assessment, the losses resulting from the Ukrainian strike on the oil refining complex of the Russian Federation are estimated at around $100 billion.
Ukraine's production capabilities are already extending beyond its borders. According to agreements and joint projects, Ukrainian companies are localizing assembly and serial production in European countries. If before the start of the full-scale war, the Ukrainian defense industry was keeping up, then by 2024 production volumes reached about $9 billion, and in 2025 they grew to $35 billion. Plans for 2026 include scaling up to $60 billion, and this is only the beginning.
The Kremlin is losing its sovereignty. China is bringing Moscow to heel. Putin is in isolation. Xi Jinping has chosen Trump. Shock. How will Beijing's new stance change the course of the war in Ukraine? Russia is turning into a full-fledged vassal. See all the details of the global blow to the Kremlin in our report. The collapse of Putin's empire. Russia has ceased to be a center of influence and power.
There's no need to be afraid. Whoever gets scared will immediately lose everything. But it's important to understand it.
What might be happening is necessary.
But that alone won't really change the situation. After all, the invasion of Ukraine became not just a military, but also a geopolitical suicide for the Kremlin. And while Putin is preoccupied with the war, China is taking over Russia's economic and political positions from the Caucasus to the Caspian Sea. Simply put, Moscow is losing influence in places where it had been considered a leading player for decades.
For China, this is an opportunity to strengthen its presence in the region and to advance its own political and economic projects. And China is taking full advantage of this. In fact, this doesn't just apply to Central Asia. We are seeing similar trends on the African continent and in Latin America as well.
The countries of Central Asia have already stopped viewing Moscow as a key center. After all, it has become clear that Russia is not only weakened by sanctions and isolation, but is also turning into a toxic partner.
Many of them articulate this position as a policy of multi-vector diplomacy, but under this guise they are really demonstrating their own understanding of global processes and the impossibility for Russia to maintain its previous status as a hegemon in these regions. That is why today, in the international arena, the central and most significant struggle is first and foremost about who can offer the best terms to all these countries and who will become their primary ally.
Since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has been steadily expanding its influence in Central Asia. It is funding roads, railway hubs, pipelines and more, turning the region into a new transit bridge between Asia and Europe, bypassing Russian territory.
Russia, having thrown all its resources into waging war against Ukraine, has significantly weakened in terms of global influence. If you take a careful look at the current global geopolitical map, you will see that the trends and developments for President Vladimir Putin and for the Russian Federation as a whole are in fact very discouraging and quite unfavorable. Putin, who truly dreamed and aspired to strengthen and expand his empire by conquering Ukraine, or at the very least by significantly weakening Ukraine and extending his political, military and economic influence over that strategically important territory, has essentially lost almost all of his international standing and reputation. He has gone from being considered a major global player on the world stage to being regarded as merely a regional dictator with limited influence.
In 2024, China's trade with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan amounted to almost $95 billion. This is more than double the figure for Russia.
Essentially, this is the fundamental strategy of China, first economic and then, as a consequence, political expansion. Therefore, as we know, according to the laws of equilibrium, where something is lost, something else will inevitably be gained. And it is obvious that Russian influence is being rapidly displaced, both in Central Asia and in other regions, which allows China not only to expand its influence, but also to gain the ability to sell goods, to influence regimes, and to strengthen its international position and coalition.
The eastern regions of Russia are also in the crosshairs of the Celestial Empire. According to economic experts' forecasts, the volume of Chinese investment in the region could reach 1 trillion rubles by 2025. Thus, the Kremlin risks losing control over 40% of its own territory.
The loss of influence by Russia, which has historically played a significant role on the world stage, means a considerable strengthening of China as a major global player and as one of the main central centers of global political gravity and power. As for the future prospects, when we look ahead, for Russia, they really do not look very promising or optimistic at all, given the current circumstances and ongoing developments.
And yet another blow to the Russian Federation from China. Chinese oil refiners have begun to refuse purchases of Russian oil after the US and other Western countries imposed sanctions against Russia's leading producers and some of their clients. At the same time, the US is also stepping up its presence in Central Asia, seeking to strengthen its partnership with the region and limit Chinese-Russian influence.
Washington understands China's desire to influence this important region and is now trying to counteract it in the context of the current confrontation between Washington and Beijing. And Trump's meeting with the leaders of the 5 Central Asian countries is nothing more than a response to the events that have in fact been taking place for quite some time now under the framework of China's initiative.
Putin is slowly but surely losing Central Asia. Russia is losing its authority in the countries of the former USSR, which the Kremlin has always regarded as its satellites.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
At this very moment, Putin has sent soldiers on motorcycles into battle, a bloodbath in Pokrovsk. The shock troops resorted to a brazen deception. The Ukrainian armed forces responded with a lightning-fast barrage. You have to see this footage. Something unprecedented has happened on the front line. Watch for the first sensational details.
Russian troops in a Mad Max style are invading the devastated Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. That was the headline of a Reuters article concerning the situation around this city in the Donbass.
Moscow claims that capturing Pokrovsk, which Russian media call the gateway to Donetsk, will allow it to advance north toward the 2 largest cities in Donetsk region, still under Ukrainian control, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk.
Russia has been trying to take Pokrovsk for over a year now. At first, there were attempts to encircle the city and cut off its logistics in order to threaten supply lines. Now, the tactic is infiltration and build-up of small groups within the city, but time goes on and the city still stands.
According to Putin's decisions, Pokrovsk and Mirnograd were supposed to be taken sometime at the end of last year, probably in December 2024. But now a year has passed and they still haven't been taken, even though the situation there is very serious.
The command of the airborne assault troops notes that the occupier is trying to use the fog to sneak into the city in small groups. The Russian army has been using infiltration tactics for more than a week now. In
recent times, the Russians have intensified their efforts to penetrate Pokrovsk using light vehicles through the southern outskirts. To do this, the enemy has taken advantage of unfavorable weather conditions, particularly dense fog. This reduces the effectiveness of our aerial reconnaissance and our ability to strike in open areas. Currently, there are more than 300 Russians in the city. Their objective remains unchanged: to reach the northern borders of Pokrovsk, followed by an attempt to encircle the agglomeration. The 7th Air Assault Corps.
According to Ukrainian intelligence, the latest deadlines for the capture of Pokrovsk are set for December 15th and for Kupiansk by the end of the year. The enemy is probing Ukrainian defenses along almost the entire front line in order to find places for new offensives. Now, this is the Zaporizhzhia direction.
Russia has also become more active in the Novopavlivka direction. In this direction, the enemy has made advances over the past few months, and now the enemy is trying to stretch our defensive line along the front, advancing not only in the Pokrovsk direction near Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, but also attempting to expand offensive actions into the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. In the
Zaporizhzhia direction, using the fog as cover, the occupying army captured 3 settlements. This was stated by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky.
The situation has significantly worsened in the Oleksandrivka and Huliaipol directions, where the enemy, taking advantage of numerical superiority in manpower and equipment during fierce fighting, advanced and captured 3 settlements. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Ukrainian defenders were forced to withdraw from Ravnopol and Zaporizhzhia region to more advantageous positions in order to save as many of their soldiers' lives as possible. The enemy, in its attempts to advance, is suffering enormous losses, and just in the past day, the Ukrainian armed forces eliminated 58 Russian soldiers in this direction, with about 30 more wounded. In
As a result of the enemy's comprehensive fire attack on our positions in the Ravnopol area, Ukrainian units relocated to more advantageous lines in order to preserve the lives of their personnel. The enemy's advance has been stopped. Efforts to block and comprehensively strike the enemy continue. Fierce fighting also continues in other sectors along the line of contact in these directions. The defense forces of southern Ukraine.
With 500 to 600 shellings using 2,000 munitions, as a result of this firepower, all positions, shelters and fortifications in some settlements have been virtually destroyed and leveled. The enemy is now trying to bring in consolidation groups, but the defense forces are striking them and preventing them from gaining a foothold in these settlements.
The defense forces of southern Ukraine continue to inflict significant losses on the enemy in manpower and equipment, while simultaneously destroying their offensive potential in rear areas.
In urgent news, Poland has pulled the emergency brake. Warsaw has pressed the revenge button. The Kremlin is in a frenzy. Convoys of equipment are rushing to the front. Mega reinforcements for the Ukrainian armed forces. This aid will change everything. Shock. Will Poland pull the final lever that will crush Moscow? All the details coming up.
More than 120 billion zlotys, or $4 billion. That's the impressive amount Poland has spent on aid to Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion. This includes both humanitarian and military support.
Poland was one of the first countries to supply Ukraine with tanks, ammunition, and defense equipment on a large scale. In 2022 to 2023, Poland delivered, among other things, more than 300 tanks, as well as armored personnel carriers, artillery systems, air defense systems, drones, mortars, assault rifles, and over 100 million rounds of ammunition. 10 airplanes and 10 helicopters were also sent to Ukraine. Between 2022 and 2024, Poland provided Ukraine with 47 packages of military aid. The cost. The value of the equipment delivered in just 2022 amounted to 7.23 billion zlotys, and in 2023 to 2024, another 5.63 billion. Poland also supplied more than 19,500 Starlink terminals, providing the Ukrainian armed forces with stable satellite communication. This accounted for almost half of all terminals used in Ukraine by the end of 2023.
Poland's assistance to Ukraine is not the result of some romantic enthusiasm. It's pragmatic. Our neighbors understand that if Ukraine falls, Poland will be next in line.
After all, a fighting Ukraine gives Europe time to better prepare for threats. This time is needed, and we have no right to waste a single minute. We will be held accountable for every minute.
318 tanks were delivered to Kiev by Warsaw. Among them are modernized T-72s, M1Rs, PT-91s, and Leopard 2S. This is more than anyone else has provided. The total value of the gratuitous aid, including training, logistics, repairs, and medical support, exceeded $4 billion by March of this year. Specifically, in 2022, it amounted to 1.6 billion, and in 2023 to 2024, 1.3 billion. Poland also provided additional support.
Poland's military assistance: 586 armored vehicles, 137 artillery systems, 10 Mi-24 helicopters, 10 MiG-29 fighter jets, 287 man-portable air defense systems, 44 air-to-air missiles, more than 100 small arms, 89 mortars, 4 Grad multiple launch rocket systems, and over 100 million rounds of ammunition.
In addition to gratuitous aid, in just 2022 to 2023, Ukraine purchased weapons from Poland worth more than 2.2 billion euros. The largest contract was a deal for 54 Krab self-propelled howitzers. Of these, 36 have already been delivered. The countries are establishing joint production of weapons and equipment. The parties agreed on the joint production of 125mm tank ammunition. There are also plans for joint production of other weapons and military equipment, including the establishment of Polish company manufacturing facilities in Ukraine.
The industry needs to be mobilized. Polish and Ukrainian industries should make joint investments, not only during the war, but also to develop their deterrence potential. These initiatives are very much needed. It is also very important for us to improve economic relations. We will support Ukraine.
Poland has become the main hub for supplying weapons to Ukraine. Also, during the war, more than 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been trained on Polish territory. With each year of the war, the assistance and cooperation between Poland and Ukraine only grows stronger.
Shock. To reveal Putin's secret plan, as many as 7 regions. The dictator wants to seize Odessa and Mykolaiv. What does the Kremlin's large-scale plan actually entail? And most importantly, how realistic is this? All the details in the report. In addition to the regions already occupied, the Russians want to take Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Odessa regions from Ukraine. And analysts at Foreign Affairs believe that 2026 could be decisive. Vladimir Putin will move toward his goal in 3 steps.
If Russia holds on to the 4 regions it has already annexed and adds Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and Odessa, this would effectively cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Under these conditions, the Kremlin will seek a ceasefire, believing it can move to the 2nd stage, using economic pressure and political warfare, backed by the threat of a new invasion, to impose control over Kiev. In the 3rd stage, Russia plans to absorb Ukraine and bring it into its orbit, similar to what it has done with Belarus.
To be honest, after reading this passage, I immediately recalled Medinsky's words, which were said at one of the meetings with the Ukrainian delegates with representatives of Ukraine about how, gentlemen, you could lose 3 more regions. Apparently such sentiments, such plans really do exist in the Kremlin. This is important because today, as Jack Watling writes again, the West, mainly including Europe, not to mention the United States, has mostly focused on the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine, on matters related to the demilitarized zone, the deployment of troops on Ukrainian territory, peacekeeping forces on Ukrainian territory, and so on. The territorial issue is being discussed, meaning various options for dividing these 3 regions, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. In fact, according to the author, this significantly distracts attention, diverts important resources, and distorts the overall understanding of what will actually happen at the front over the next year, at the very least. The main point here is that President Putin is not currently ready or willing to agree to any kind of ceasefire until not only those regions that are already at least partially occupied, but also 3 additional new regions are fully occupied and brought under Russian control.
Europe's indecisiveness, Donald Trump's flirtation with the Kremlin, and the focus on China, all of this only encourages the Russian dictator. Although it's not easy for Russia, it stands its ground. According to analysts' forecasts, it will take a set of measures to topple this colossus with feet of clay. A painful blow to the shadow fleet, to the oil industry of the aggressor country, as well as more weapons and improved training for Ukrainian recruits. At the same time, analysts note that one of Ukraine's main problems today is an insufficient number of infantry.
The problem lies not so much in gathering people off the street, but in improving the quality and capabilities of training and integrating Ukrainian infantry into combat brigades. Today, more people are serving in the Ukrainian army than at any other point in the war. But the military is unable to train its personnel to carry out tasks on the front line. To solve this, to address this growing problem, Ukraine's new Army Corps will need to establish brigade rotations and allow stronger units to help train the less prepared ones. About
the fact that one of the reasons the Russians are having success near Pokrovsk is the insufficient number of infantry has long been pointed out by Ukrainian analysts as well. In some positions under incredibly harsh conditions with constant enemy assaults and shelling, soldiers have to hold out for 100 days or more. And although recently the focus has been on Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, the gray zone is rapidly expanding in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia directions. The threat of occupation is looming over Huliaipol.
To the north, a rather formidable Russian armada is advancing. And in general, if serious and decisive measures are not taken, and if the defensive structures, the fortifications around, in fact, the fortified area of Huliaipol, which is not just the settlement itself, but also encompasses the surrounding areas, the situation could become even more critical. If these defensive positions and fortifications are indeed well built and constructed to a high standard, then there is a certain chance that the plans and intentions of the Russian generals will not be fulfilled as they had hoped. But if this is not the case, then the story of Vuhledar, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and unfortunately Pokrovsk may repeat itself. But again, this is somewhat related. These events that are happening there are somewhat related to the article we discussed, which talks about the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia region and the capture of Zaporizhzhia by Russian forces. This is considered one of the strategic objectives of the upcoming campaign. In next year's campaign, but indeed, Huliaipol is one of the important and significant, I'd say, a key point in the defensive system of the Zaporizhia region in its defensive system. If the situation there develops according to a negative scenario, it means the Russians will be able to establish a kind of bridgehead in the coming weeks already as a bridgehead for launching an offensive next year.
This winter, British analysts note, could prove decisive. To a large extent, the success of the Russians will also depend on the mood of the Ukrainians. That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.